Okay, Lauren K, Sergio E, thank you guys very much for your donations to this show. And all you out there who are appreciating it, hope you enjoy. Jumping right into this, Mr. Producer is actually repairing the roof of a building today, and he's on a lift, with the Ultra Boom, one of those really long, maybe 100-foot lift. and it costs a fortune to do. So we're trying to keep him from having to do a whole bunch of extra work today. So this will be a little on the short side, probably. So Kevin, and this was at my indulgence or my request, Kevin says, would you mind giving an online critique of the still life I'm working on in the studio? I do have some other stuff I can talk about, but I thought this might be one that'd be efficient for us to get through. And by the way, do keep coming with your comments and all those things. If you're trying to work in the way we're talking about here, and if you can get your head around it by just watching the videos, do give it a shot. But if you are, that is one of those things. What I'm doing today is one of those things that I'm trying to sort of refine for the purpose of doing it with that group meeting we're going to be trying to do, this online meeting. I am following, sort of thinking the way to do it is going to be with people's work, to have that carry on that kind of a meeting. So if people want to get critiques, get back and forth, see other people's work, and see what I would say about it, this is one of those. You look at this one, watch what I'm doing now, see if it appeals to you, and if that makes sense to you as a way to go for that, for the online class that we're talking about doing. It'd be an 8-week meetup with me, an hour and a half, maybe more, and once a week for some period, 8 weeks or so. I've done that, and we'll do it again, by the way, for composition courses online. They seem to work really effectively. And if any of you guys are interested in that sort of thing, just be in touch about that as well. But so let's get on with this. Would you mind giving an online critique of the still life I'm working on in the studio? And actually, Kevin is in my studio with me now. He's been with me a couple years and making excellent progress and all that. And what was I going to say about it? Oh, sorry, Kevin. So I was critiquing him, and so there are things I'll probably be saying that have to do with the critique I just given him, but this is for your benefit. All right, so let's just look at it. Now, there's a couple things that I'm going to talk about here. First of all, if you're going to do these kinds of things with me, ideally we get these shots set up so that they're side by side, like this. Ideally, send them to me like this. If you send them to me when they come like this, if you do this with one shot, and it's important for me to see the single shot, with you and your painting. With your still life and your painting side by side. And one of the reasons for that is I want to see whether or not you grasp the idea of being in sight size. Now, you don't have to be in sight size, and in some ways it's better not to be in sight size. But for beginners, that was a gamble discussion, being closer to a one-to-one relationship in the sizes. But I'm still not buying in that that's the most perfect thing. And sight size is a good place, though, from time to time to be able to move your paintings so that they do appear to be the same size. And then you can review them in that. Sight size just means they appear to be the same size at the same time. So you can see the painting here appears to be bigger than the setup. And that's due to some restrictions in the studio. And we all, it's not unusual to have those, and you just live with it. It doesn't matter. What you really have to learn to do is to see relationally. Which means you have to see the widths to the heights of your objects, and those have to be right to each other. The size of one to another, one area to another, any of those things, they have to appear relationally correct. And that's, of course, learning to see. That's the point of it, is to get you to learn to see relationally. All right. Now, what else can I tell you about this? So for your information, Kevin said that the photograph on the right, which of the stuff is a little bit cooler than it really is. In other words, this red, for example, is a little bit richer, should be a little bit richer, a little pinker in nature. And I think he also said that this one up here, actually, in this image, is cooler too. Doesn't have as much life. This is more correct. So let's see. Do I want? Yeah. So I think what I'm going to do is just move over to where we're talking about them in a side by side. Now let's talk about this first, though. What I've done is I've cropped. I mean, what I'm going to show you is that when I take this painting at this size, this is a front-on view. I take that, and he takes a front-on view of this, and I use the same proportion frame. So understand, I cut a little frame, right? And I placed it over this one here. Now, it's to show you there's some distortion. You can see things are different, but the distortion isn't primarily in this image. It is a little, though. It gets elongated. I've talked to Mr. Producer about that. Understands cameras. There is something that happens in the lens of a camera when you shoot. When you start getting out toward the sides, things start getting elongated, like this handle, this thing here, starts looking like a longer oval than it is. But even here, the image itself, you're shooting this at sidelong. Now, Kevin, this is a critique now. Kevin, this thing, you should make sure that you're always vertical on the sides. Make sure you're plumb on the side edges, because that then becomes a useful piece of information. If you know that's plumb, then when you're looking at angles on either side, you can actually use that as if it were a plumb, like a plumb line. The one that Sargent says, don't let out of your left hand, right? So, but you can see that using this proportion exactly, I put it over here, and you can see there's a number of ways in which it's distorted. One is that you can see this is tapering down. That's just perspective. You see that, and tapering down, getting smaller to the right. So we're not going to see the same thing. It's not going to really be, if you're sending me these images, I won't be seeing a one-to-one. This will look elongated over here. This will probably look elongated on this side. Things will be stretched this way on the left side too. The further we get from the center of the lens, right, the more distortion you're going to get left and right. Just so you know that if anybody's inclined to send me images. And I think then I'll just go jumping right in. That's just important stuff. So let's just jump right in here and talk about the painting. Now, I'm going to treat this first for a few minutes as if it were simply the colors that he's put there are really, on both sides are really true to nature in this case and true to his painting in this case. And I'm just going to treat it so you'll see what a critique would look like by me if you were in the studio, okay? So that first thing, that color critique would be that this picture here is lacking the reds. In other words, the blues need to have more red in them. The blues here need to have more red. Now, believe me, this is happening because of the camera to a significant degree. So don't be worrying about that when I critique it that way here. But you can see that you would want to get your, whatever you can do if you're a good photographer, it's going to be a lot better you're going to get better results. But I'm with Gamble on this, that I'm not primarily able to, in this kind of an indirect setting, not being able to see nature side by side truly with what's in front of me. I'm not going to spend my time critiquing that stuff. Okay. So now what I wanted to start with is just simply to say that this is actually a delightful still life. In the first place, because it has a nice color scheme. I'm just going to, why not start there? Just the very delightful, I guess it's amber and blue, right? And then variations in green and yellow and stuff like that. The pinks, whatever they're doing, but the pinks actually wander through this thing in different places, you can see here. But it's very pleasing organization of those things. The pinks are pleasing in the way they're aligned with each other. And the blues are going through numbers of variations from very green blues to less green blues to purple blues. And there's a great deal of variety. Again, it's ideal if you can send me the image exactly the way it looks. But there's a great deal of variety in the blues, and there's some nice travel, nice distribution. So, Kevin, I commend you for that stuff, and I apologize for not having mentioned that when I was in the studio. this picture appears to be hyperchromatic, and if it were, and you're saying this one is a little bit washed out, but if this were true, you would be painting, you'd be forcing the colors into places they're really not. All the colors are more neutral, but I think you can see why I can't really discuss that. I can discuss, though, visual order stuff to whatever extent, again. But for sure, I can discuss proportions, and I can discuss shape play, right? Those things. So at least let's do that for a few minutes. And by the way, it's important when you're standing there shooting a photograph for me to look at, or when you're just standing there yourself, that every time you look to correct a shape, that you make sure you're aligning your eye to exactly the same place. For example, it appears that he's got this thing here coming down and just touching like at the 2/3 place on this. Or maybe it's half on this one, whatever. But if you have something in back and something in front that's just about touching, let's see if I can find a different one that might be more helpful. If you have an object here and an object here, and say what my thumb is doing, you can see where that's just touching on something. You'd try to keep that every single time, because if you're standing in the wrong place, that's going to happen. The thumb is not going to align with that spot. That's only true of things in front in relation to things behind. I hope that's something you can follow. So, and there's any number of places you could do it. And in fact, you should always have a fallback, but take ones that are preferably like right in line with each other. So this line comes down. Is it obvious exactly where it hits and touches that on this pattern here? Or is there something better somewhere else? Maybe sometimes in the background you'll have a little fold in the cloth, and some part like that with just touching it. Doesn't matter what you pick. Of course, if you don't use the same height shoes and all that sort of stuff every day, you might get differences too. But that's an issue. So make sure you're always doing that. But the reason I mention it is it appears that this gap here is quite big, and in this one it appears to be less big. And so that question comes up: are you standing in the same place every time? You'd expect any of the gaps between all the gaps to be right. If you're standing in the right place and you're basing it on something, like if you're lined up just right with that line, hitting this thing, or whatever you find is the most useful thing. And by the way, it's never particularly useful to have a straight line come into a curve. That's not particularly useful. To have a straight line come down and hit into a highlight like that might actually have it'd be a very short highlight. It gives you less range to be wrong. Anything. It might be that some part of this thing here comes up and just touches, and this one in just a very useful way. But that was the one I picked initially, and I'm thinking that might have been the most useful one you have out there. Anything in front of something else, if you move it this way and that way, when you're standing in the right place, that part of this thing here should touch just on that part of this thing here. And the more it's just some sort of an actual point, and don't do this in an obnoxious way. There's usually just a random point somewhere that isn't just going to distort your composition and cause problems that way. All right, so that's a thing. So make sure you're always standing in the same place each time. So there's a number of things here that are really, I would like to talk about them as design issues. So for example, he's got a big sweeping arc here, and he's got other curves at different places in here. And you can see he's got curves again. He's got curves again here and here. And so these things are all beautifully related. He's got a very nice play of this thing coming around here, or even this thing here coming into this thing here. Very intriguing play of, I just call it shape play for now. Sometimes that's patterning, but depending on how we mean it, or how we're using it. We also have, objects like this and the way they play to each other, things that are similar. So round things like cupped things have a relationship in the painting, and you want them to be right in relation to each other. You can see, by the way, how much less deformed this is. It's less elongated in this front view shot from the middle of this thing than it was when it was shot from way over to one side. Let's start with one of the first. Well, I don't want to get off that subject for a second. So, Kevin, if I was trying to correct this, there's one of the things I may have mentioned to you was that you have a shape here and you have a shape here, and you can make this shape and you can make this shape. But what you want to learn to do is make this shape and this shape sing together. So there's a really suave beauty to the way this, even with that blip there, the way this curve plays to that curve is very beautiful. And you're pursuing that. And it looks like you could use a little more arc in this one here. And then there's that whole orientation, is the angle right of that arc, and all that sort of stuff to make it do this. Does this one come under enough? But the specific ways in which it's making this combination, seeing those kinds of things and going after them is going to make your drawing more accurate. And you know that, but I'm saying that for the sake of, and thank you for letting me use your your images for the sake of this discussion for others. But wherever else you're seeing it, for example, if you're trying to get the curve of this right, you can try to get it right all day just as a curve, but if you can see what it's doing with this one, which is another big curve, and you might even say there's a section of it is very like this one here. What they're doing together, if you have the imagination to see it and go for it and really get it, and you're in the direction of that, but this one could come under a little more and then go out further that way, et cetera, et cetera. But as I look at these together, I see how I can correct this one. And so that's the thing I would really very much encourage you to do. The idea of seeing relationally, if you're seeing relationally and you're seeing how they make beauty between, through the relationships, you're going to be more enamored of them and want to pursue them and have the energy to pursue them than you are of, is that right? Or is that right? Is that wrong? Is that right? And just, is that accurate? It can be quite tedious. By the way, one thing I'll notice on this one, and that was another question for the way I was, this thing here doesn't appear to plumb the same as, so this looks like it's very nearly, this edge, very nearly in plumb, let's say that. If you measured over this way, by the way, think of that way, that if this is your actual vertical and something is plumb, then it should measure over the exact same amount. So this one here looks more nearly, whatever it is, more nearly plumb. There's a difference in the angle between this and that, most decidedly. This one tends to be a right tilt between point A and point B. This one tends to be a little bit straighter, or even a left tilt, shall we say, between those two. I hope that comes across when I'm showing that. By the way, you're going to not see a lot of my face because you need to see these things up close to get any benefit out of them. And I'm just mentioning that. I actually was forgetting. I was showing you things. And Mr. Producer will get that, but most of this is probably going to be done as I'm showing you here. So, okay, so, but then there's this other kind of thing. Now, we're just talking about pedantic stuff now, shall we say. But one of the things that appears on this thing, and when you reduce it to something that begins to look more sight-sized, you can see this, and that's one of the values of being sight-sized. You can actually see, this is the Meldrum talking about whether they would just merge into each other. And if you merge these two, you'd find that this pot is wider than that pot. They wouldn't quite do the same thing, would they? And so that's a height to width thing, right? But that's one of those things, again, where you have to use your imagination and try to see it different ways. Keep your eyes to one side. Don't just do some math, or whatever. And specifically one way, but keep doing it in other ways. But make sure you're taking note. You got something here, and enough data here to mark what we could call a bottom, and up here enough data to mark a top, and therefore this width should be a given, should be easy, and you've got very good marks to do it with, right? These are strong. So it should be more obvious that that's just not quite on the money as a width goes, right? Now, and by the way, the reason I do this kind of thing is because you're trying to correct your eye. You're trying to become better and routinely better at getting your proportions really good. So I'm just showing you things that I would find to be, I walk in the room sort of, and by the way, anybody who walks in the room is going to see things you don't see. You've been around this too much, you're getting jaundiced, whatever. But staying objective is a key thing so that you can, almost always imagine if somebody else came in the room, what would they see? I used to do that with Gamma, trying to get ahead of it, So, but that's one. So there's the width to height of that looks like the width should be greater if the height is correct. Then there's the size type thing. And this one here, for example, and by the way, all the drawing of these things in other ways is very much in the right direction. I mean, this thing here could be a little more vertical. It's laying out a little bit too much this way. And I'm sorry about that. No, I'm doing the right thing. Yeah, I was saying, is this the painting over here? I'm doing it. Gamble did that to us once. He started critiquing. In fact, he would not infrequently walk up to the model with the brush and start reaching out to paint the model. I apologize. In any case, no, but it does appear that this size here, and this is a mass to mass thing, that this size here appears to be too small to this total mass. It doesn't take up enough space. You could say, or this is too small to this mass. Any mass that you find useful. Now, most people find it obvious that you need to get these three that are similar, rather, little blobs, to get them the right in relation to each other. But that's a size to size thing, and just be routinely good about that kind of stuff. So you can see how that might be something I would critique in this one. This one here, if you're standing in the same place every time, this height to width. So you'd call this an ovoid, even though that technically out there is an ovoid, or you could argue that that's the ovoid of it, like an object's ovoid. But every unit that has boundaries has a tilt and a width to length. And you can see in this photograph at least that the width to length of this isn't correct. Yours is bigger this way than it should be. And so on. I've talked about some things you might do to this shape, like get this one to come up, get it coming up higher, or this one dipping down more. Get a little bit more unity to that roundness there, but get this thing more out for that in right there. See that? Blah, this. Okay. Now, these are just shapy things. Now, the one thing you talked about that I think is worth talking about well, by the way, I want to say about cameras again. You have highlights on here that showed, and I remember seeing them in the studio really brightly compared to the areas around them. They were really standouts. Now, the Boston School guys would say, don't work from the highlights, but you try to work with it so that you get the magic. If it's part of the pleasure of the picture, wouldn't you want that? Well, this is one of the things where you got to figure out how to use your camera so it actually shows us the image the way you see it with your eyes. Now, that's when you're looking at it just vaguely, not when you're zooming in with your eyes and all that sort of stuff and trying to see these things. But there was definitely a thing going on in this picture where the midtone along inside here was more closely resembled the background in value than it did the highlights or a particular light edge that was happening along here. And the camera is setting us up to fail. Now, I'm going to say another thing about that, and is if you paint to a camera, you can correct some things sometimes, the shape and things like that. Like putting it side by side with the camera shot, but there's a lot of falseness in camera, so don't use it for much more than that if you are going to use a camera. But even a camera, if you do it wrong, the lens will distort your image, and you won't be able to have the same quality success you'd otherwise have. By the way, let's go back to the ovoid thing again. Now, if I've cropped this right, and I sort of think I have, because you've got the exit there not too different from mine. We've got those in about the same place in the way I've cropped this for you. And you have this thing just barely touching the frame. That thing drops dead. And so I'm assuming you meant to have it on the frame. And when that happens, you have this pretty nearly what I have. So we shouldn't be too dissimilar. But what I want you to observe, though, is that the height of this appears to be too great for the length of this. By the way, hopefully you're getting these things already. You just, some things show up earlier than others. That's the whole point of the backstraggler, trying to correct these things. But one of the reasons, you're trying, this is its own ovoid, however you want to think of this. It could be going to this. At some point, it's going to this as well, but there's some distance over here to a height here that should feel generally the same, no matter what you've drawn, if the relationships are good. I mean, the value relationships and the color relationships. This thing should appear to be the same height to width, and again, that's the ovoid discussion. And that happens over and over and over again in your work. By the way, the size of a thing like this, the size of this, how does that feel to this whole? how does it feel to much more of the whole than that? How does that feel? And of course, how does the great gestural stuff do in the context of, like this is a big sweeping going in like this. How does it feel when you're looking at the angle of this? So yeah, and I'm always very interested and concerned with anything that becomes its own ovoid. Like if this thing here goes around, comes all the way to here and back up to through here, that has a height to width that needs to be correct. So that'll keep you from just being wrong about an object because you're using context. So you're going to have multiple times that you can things that you can associate that with to get that context. It's true of color, of course, too. For example, when you're trying to figure out the color of this, and you have passages that play similarly, there are parts that look like, oh, that might be a similar, or this might be sort of similar colors. Or you have even lights. You just look at this light to this light to this light. Just make sure you see which one of those three, if you're doing three whites that are sort of similar, which is the yellow, which is the red, and which is the blue. Now, what I want to do is actually end with the thing we started with in your critique, Kevin, and that was getting the total light, getting more magic in the light effect. And based on what I see here, you've already definitely come that way. The thing is, don't do it artificially. And what I mean by that is you can get a brilliant effect by painting this too hyperchromatic. And you're saying you didn't, or that's not really what happened here. But you might be missing effects by not getting this dark to light hitting along here, for example, and smashing. Even though it's skinny, there's a serious light punch in a couple of these places. Don't be weak in those kinds of guys. You don't have those at all. So, and don't try to substitute for it somewhere else, okay? So that's a big deal when you're getting these effects. And I think you remember that I was talking about getting that one. I think you've improved that one. Sometimes, so whatever the strongest effect is, you have a strong effect right there, you have another one right there. Wherever those effects happen, by the way, this one is more lost, this one is the punch point. So if this one should be weaker in nature, but you've got it reading as a silhouette stronger than it should be, then this one's going to be weakened by effect, and it won't be the same set of notes. And by the way, don't judge your colors too early, your light effects too early. If you have a piece of light here and you don't have it in at all yet, I prefer to generalize, by the way. I'd prefer to even switch that and become pink. I don't prefer to have this. You're right that at some point this is part of the darks, but at some other point this is hugely part of the lights too. So, and it has a very interesting, shall we say, turquoise into pink movement, shall we say. By the way, there's another ovoid that appears to be too high for its width. See this unit right here? Appears to be too high for its width. And that seems to be happening a little bit. Maybe so once you start going El Greco, everything will look right because it's all El Grecoing together, and you can get set up. So you do want to pay attention right from the beginning to all the abstractions that make a height to a width, and just stay on them and stay on them. So yeah. Now there's a thing happening here, Kevin, that we can talk about. So. I'm trying to remember. I'm not going to try any further. There's a Da Vinci thing that relates to this, but I'm not going to bring it up. But this thing comes down, and the way it comes down, it's cutting across here and joining that. You see it doing it. Comes across here, and you can see it's very. By the way, you created it. A lot of times, people, perhaps you, create things, and then you don't recognize what they're doing. You still have to find it out. You see what I mean? You put it in, you like it, but when you go to drawing it. But it becomes something different. But you can see this is a little high and it angles down in a different way. It doesn't enter this in the same way. So there's something about this that feels like it ought to sweep down more and come in at a little more gracious angle. Now, some of that might be in the detail. Who knows? I'm not saying, you'd have to, it gets worked out. You work it out. But keep your eye on the grace, the beauty of how this elegantly ties on to this. The problem, by the way, doesn't have to be here. The problem could be that this is too low. So if this stuff here is too low, that also won't work. But it feels like it's probably a little bit of both. It feels like this is in the painting, just based on top and bottom, it feels like this probably is a tiny bit too high. And it feels like this is probably a little bit too low. But that's the thing to constantly keep your eyes on, big, long excursions like that. Any sets of relationships, color play, as I said, from the greener blue to the other blue, to the less green, all the way over to the redder blues, noticing that and getting that play right in your picture to get those to be right. playing those gradual roles is a big deal. So, what else is there? Kevin, we did talk about some other things, and you've corrected them. What I am trying to do is to get you guys, when you're trying to get the light, don't underestimate how important it is, for example, to show the difference. And it showed more in the painting, but to show the difference, see, this is a light around here, and this is a midtone in through here, right around there, right? And you're getting the midtone here, but you're not separating the light enough. And the light here separates even from the tabletop. So this light, you're diminishing the quality of the light by not getting that light separated into a punch. And so give it its moment. Give it its place. Give it that moment. You did correct this pretty well. It feels like it still wants to sweep up a little bit more. There's a sort of a sweep to this, just a bend. Maybe it's mostly down here where you see it starting to bend, but it's doing it in a way that's less than a vertical ladder. But yeah, every little place you can go, though, where the light, like here, get all the light. If that's true, again, this is all based on whether or not this is really the same picture. But get all the light wherever it happens. So if you've improved this, you got this light significantly better here from when I saw it earlier. So that's great. But that's why I'm talking about this kind of stuff here. Punch these lights. Punch them right there, right wherever it is, wherever the dark meets the light and punches it up. Do it on its own terms. Don't force it anywhere. And you're doing quite well here to have lostness. This is the value of this. Is a lot of people don't see how to do that, but to get the value of this, essentially the same as the value of that. Blue is a tough thing. Yeah, and so a couple other things that he's doing, Kevin is doing that's excellent. And one is he's seeing the types, the strawy types here. He's got one here, and he's got another one in there. This is very nice distribution of these things. Just happened to notice it just now, but it's really something to recognize the importance of color pattern travel, the distribution of any kind of thing that happens. A color is one thing, but the distribution of types of objects, porcelain or metal or something, well, it doesn't matter. They all have, or man-made objects versus natural objects. They all have their interplay, and it just sort of as if it were realistic. Just life. But what I think I was talking about the interplay of light and just that whole thing about getting all the light, and you've done it in a number of places here. You're onto it very well here. I probably covered it all. Kevin, you definitely want to keep your eyes big. Don't force darks. These in your picture, it looks like some of these darks, like this one, might be forced a little bit. Don't force darks just to get a light effect. A lot of times people don't understand that the light effect, by powering up this one bit of light right here and having that one edge pop, you don't have to get this right. You have to get the light where it really pops. So you see it happening right there. That's crucial stuff. That's crucial stuff there. So that's what I'm trying to get you to do rather than think the object is going to bring all the light when the light is made out of the object and its components, its internal components between the two of them. I say meaning, in other words, it's certainly this value has to be right to the other values in the room, but the specifics of the light where it pops at different places, including a place like this right here, those things all are contributing to the general light, which is the question that you brought up. You just didn't feel like your overall glow was right. So don't underestimate that bit of it. What happens specifically here. If you have a glare like that and it doesn't glare, then the picture has lost light, right? And by the way, and this isn't probably true. I remember saying this, and I think it's better than this. But if this is rich and you don't have it rich, or if it's warm and you have it cold, it might have a difference. It might have a whole different read about what the light's doing. Things offsetting each other. This here making this rich blue when it's more neutral, if it's more neutral, eating up the glow of this one. So it diminishes the light in the sense of the general impression. You know what I mean? It won't be the same general impression. So, and again, don't judge your stuff too soon. A lot of times, get all these little lights in here. By the time you get all of them in there, you begin to see whether or not the picture is coming to light. But there's so many little lights here, and you're trying to do it all with that big thing, and that's not a bad thing to do. Although I would really encourage you all to try to look at the whole picture when you're doing this and make sure you stay with it long enough. Don't generalize about it in some happy light color picked on one little spot, but if this actually were like this, it's got some rich areas, some less rich areas, it's got some light effects. I would make sure that thing generally is the right color, and not just some happy version of the right color. Make sure it generally does the right thing. And you are generalizing, but do it a little more proximally if that's actually somewhat more true than way. And it was, by the way, I do remember that. Anyway, I'm getting out of this. One of the things I'll tell you is that in a critique, you don't need to, and you don't want to belabor too many points with a student. I'm doing this because I want to show you the kinds of stuff we talk about in a critique and give you some idea what it would be like if you were hanging with me in a video. So there's another one of those sizes that's just a little bit too small, isn't it? That one, compared to the world around it. So that's just a thing. Gamble used to say this: you might call this a detail. He would say, you don't make your details with amplitude. Don't make them mean. Don't make them too small. And a lot of times little things become, they can be like that. All right. Now, I'm not talking about this in through here. It's different. One of the things about a really blue day, though, is that the shadows will definitely show as more golden. That difference is really going to be there. So to the degree that you might have shot this on a different day, that who knows what the difference is. But there is a tendency, and there's a warm, cool thing that's very, very strong. If you are painting this, I know you're painting on a blue day, so I would expect these to be more golden, all the shadows to be more golden a little bit than what you have, but just for what it's worth. All right, and that's the kind of critique you're going to get if you're listening to me. And if you wanted to be part of that group, if we actually go in this direction, then please feel free to join us, and let's see what we can do to maybe show work, and see if we can share benefit. Okay. Kevin, thank you very much for allowing us to use your picture that way. And Mr. Producer, I'm sorry. I thought it was going to take less time than that. All right. So, let me know what you're thinking, and I'd be happy to do more of these similar types of things. Be in touch. Okay. Comments, everything else is appreciated. Donations, please keep them coming in. All right, good. And so we'll see you in the next one. Have a great week.